Billionaire CEO dies, leaves entire fortune to Black Maid. What she does next is unbelievable. His family was at his bedside, ready to inherit a legacy built on power and ambition. But they had no idea that their father had made one final, shocking choice that would rewrite their history. He left his entire fortune to the one person he truly trusted, his quiet, unassuming maid. What did she know about him that they didn't? Was she a pawn in a larger game, or the mastermind behind it all? The inheritance was a powder keg, and what she did with the first few $1 million was the spark that ignited a firestorm. Her first move wasn't what anyone expected, and it wasn't for her. It was a move of pure defiance that proved the billionaire's will wasn't an act of charity, but an act of revenge. What was it? Hey, story lover! Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go. The monitors in the private wing of Manhattan General Hospital flatlined at exactly 3:47 a.m. Richard Blackstone, the 73-year-old CEO of Blackstone Industries, was dead. His empire, worth $2.4 billion, sprawled across real estate, technology, and media. But as his three children gathered around his still warm body, none of them noticed the small, weathered woman standing silently in the corner. Maria Santos had been cleaning up after the Blackstone family for 30 years. She'd scrubbed their toilets, laundered their secrets, and absorbed their cruelty with the quiet dignity of someone who had nowhere else to go. To them, she was furniture, useful, reliable, and utterly invisible. Finally, whispered Victoria Blackstone, the eldest daughter, her Botox preventing any real expression of grief. "The old bastard is gone." Her brother Dirk nodded, already calculating his share of the inheritance. The youngest, James, was busy texting his drug dealer. None of them had visited their father in months before his sudden heart attack. None of them had held his hand as he died. Only Maria had been there every day, reading him newspapers, bringing him homemade soup, and listening to him ramble about regrets they'd never understand. 3 days later, the mahogany-paneled conference room at Whitman and Associates was packed with Blackstone family members, their lawyers, and financial advisors. Everyone expected the standard reading: equal splits, maybe a few charitable donations for tax purposes. The family had already started spending their anticipated inheritances. Attorney Harold Whitman, a man who'd known Richard for 40 years, cleared his throat. His hands trembled slightly as he held the will. "The last will and testament of Richard Blackstone," he began, his voice cracking. "To my children, who see me only as a bank account, I leave nothing but this advice: learn to work." The room erupted. Victoria shot to her feet, her face contorting with rage. Dirk grabbed the table edge, knuckles white. James, for once, looked up from his phone. Whitman continued, his voice steadier now. "To Maria Santos, who has shown me more kindness in 30 years than my own flesh and blood has in a lifetime, I leave my entire estate. All assets, all companies, all properties, and all liquid assets totaling approximately $2.4 billion. The silence was deafening. Then Victoria screamed. But Maria Santos wasn't even in the room. She was at home in her tiny Queens apartment, unaware that her life had just changed forever. When the lawyers found Maria 2 hours later, she was mopping the floor of a local community center where she volunteered on weekends. The news hit her like a physical blow. She sat heavily on a plastic chair, staring at Harold Whitman as he explained her new reality. "Mrs. Santos," he said gently, "you are now one of the richest women in America." But Maria wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the last conversation she'd had with Mr. Richard, as she'd called him for 3 decades. "They'll come for you," he'd whispered from his hospital bed. "They'll say you manipulated me, that you're not worthy. But you know the truth, Maria. You know what they did." She did know. She'd seen it all, heard it all, cleaned up after it all. The family thought she didn't speak English well enough to understand their conversations. They were wrong. Within hours, the Blackstone children had assembled a legal army. Victoria hired the most ruthless probate attorney in the city. Dirk leveraged his connections in the financial world. James, surprisingly, proved most vindictive of all. He hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on Maria. They offered her $10 million to walk away. When she refused, they offered $50 million. When she refused again, they declared war. That woman is a gold digger who manipulated a sick old man, Victoria told reporters camped outside the Blackstone mansion. Will prove my father wasn't in his right mind when he made this ridiculous will. But what the family didn't know was that Maria had been preparing for this moment for years. Richard hadn't just left her money, he'd left her ammunition. Maria's first move shocked everyone. Instead of hiring lawyers or moving into a mansion, she walked into the offices of the New York Times and the Washington Post with a manila envelope that would detonate like a bomb across the media landscape. The headlines the next morning were devastating. Blackstone children, a legacy of corruption, the family's secrets a billionaire died to expose. Maria had 30 years of evidence. Photos, documents, recordings, all legally obtained while she cleaned their offices and homes. She documented Dirk's embezzlement from company funds to pay gambling debts. Victoria's tax fraud through her art charity. James's involvement in a hit-and-run accident that the family had covered up by paying off witnesses and bribing police. But the most explosive revelation was yet to come. The real bombshell came 3 days later when Maria held her first and only press conference. Standing on the steps of the Queen's Community Center where she'd learned the news, she looked directly into the cameras with the quiet strength that had sustained her for decades. I want to tell you why Mr. Richard really left me his fortune, she said, her accented English clear and strong. It wasn't charity. It was justice. She paused, holding up a faded photograph. This is my daughter, Elena. She was 17 when she worked as an intern at Blackstone Industries 15 years ago. She was bright, beautiful, and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She died in what everyone said was a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs at the Blackstone building after working late. The crowd leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. But Elena didn't fall. She was pushed by James Blackstone, who had been harassing her for months. When she threatened to report him, he killed her. His family covered it up. They made it disappear. They thought I would never find out. Maria's revelation sent shockwaves through the city. Within hours, the FBI reopened Elena's case. The cover-up unraveled with stunning speed as Maria provided evidence that Richard had been secretly gathering for 15 years, security footage the family thought had been destroyed, witness testimonies that had been bought and buried, forensic evidence that had been suppressed. James Blackstone was arrested at his penthouse apartment. Victoria and Dirk were named as accessories after the fact. The Blackstone empire began to crumble as partners distanced themselves and stocks plummeted. But Maria wasn't done. The most shocking revelation came from Richard Blackstone's private journals, which Maria found in a safety deposit box he'd left her the key to. The entries, written in his own hand, detailed his growing horror as he discovered what his family had done. I built an empire for monsters, one entry read. They took the one person who mattered to the only person who ever mattered to me. Maria showed me more kindness than I deserved, and they stole her child. I will make this right. The journals revealed that Richard had spent his final years not just gathering evidence, but engineering his family's downfall. Every business decision in his final decade had been designed to make their crimes easier to expose. He'd been playing a long game of justice, and Maria had been his chosen instrument of revenge. But perhaps the most stunning revelation was the last entry. Maria doesn't know yet, but Elena was not just her daughter. Elena was mine too. The DNA tests confirmed what Richard's journal had revealed. Elena Santos had been Richard Blackstone's biological daughter, the result of a brief relationship with Maria when she was young, before either of them were married. Richard had kept the secret to protect them both, but had quietly supported Elena's education and dreams. When his legitimate children killed his secret daughter, they had unknowingly murdered their own half-sister. The revelation added another layer to the case. James hadn't just committed murder, he'd committed fratricide. The family that had spent weeks claiming Maria was an outsider trying to steal their inheritance had to face the truth. She was the mother of their father's daughter, and the only one of them who truly belonged in his will. The trials were swift and brutal. James was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Victoria and Dirk received lengthy sentences for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The family's legal fees and criminal penalties consumed what remained of their personal assets. But Maria's justice went beyond the courtroom. With the Blackstone fortune officially hers, Maria began the most ambitious philanthropic campaign in American history. She established the Elena Santos Foundation, focusing on justice for working-class families who had been victimized by the wealthy and powerful. She funded legal aid clinics in every major city, created scholarship programs for the children of domestic workers, and launched investigations into dozens of cold cases involving suspicious deaths of employees at major corporations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The family that had tried to destroy her had made her the most powerful advocate for people like herself in the country. Maria didn't just give the money away, she weaponized it. She bought the media companies that had initially sided with the Blackstone family and turned them into platforms for investigative journalism focused on corporate crime. She purchased the law firms that had tried to intimidate her and redirected them toward representing the powerless against the powerful. Most satisfying of all, she bought the Blackstone mansion and turned it into a home for single mothers escaping domestic violence. Mr. Richard wanted justice, she told a reporter a year later, standing in the mansion's foyer where she'd once scrubbed floors. But I think he would be proud that justice became something even more powerful: hope. The most poetic justice came 2 years later when Maria was featured on the cover of Forbes as one of the most influential people in America. The article detailed how she'd used the Blackstone fortune to create a network of advocacy organizations that had successfully prosecuted over 200 cases of workplace violence and corporate cover-ups. The money was gone, not spent frivolously, but invested in a legacy that would outlive them all. Elena's name was on scholarship programs in 30 states, legal clinics in 50 cities, and a federal law requiring mandatory reporting of workplace deaths. Victoria Blackstone, serving her sentence in federal prison, was reportedly heard telling other inmates, "We never saw her coming. She was just the maid." But Maria Santos had never been just anything. She'd been a mother, a survivor, and finally, an instrument of perfect justice. Richard Blackstone's final gamble had paid off beyond his wildest dreams. The billionaire's children had inherited nothing. But his maid, the woman they'd treated as invisible, had inherited the power to make visible all the crimes they'd thought they'd buried forever. In the end, the Blackstone fortune hadn't bought Richard immortality or respect. But in Maria's hands, it had bought something infinitely more valuable: justice for those who thought they'd never see it, and hope for those who'd given up believing it existed. The maid had become the master. The invisible had become undeniable. And the quiet woman who'd spent 30 years cleaning up their messes had finally cleaned house in the most spectacular way possible. Richard Blackstone had died a bitter, lonely man. But through Maria Santos, he'd found redemption. And through her courage, Elena Santos had finally found peace. The billion-dollar betrayal had become a billion-dollar reckoning. And in Queens, in a small apartment that Maria kept despite her wealth, Elena's picture still sat on the mantel, next to a new photo of a scholarship recipient who looked just like her, holding a law degree with Elena's name on it. Justice, it turned out, was the only inheritance that truly mattered.